Hello there, my name's Brandon and I make pictures out of tiny squares. And that's an extra special hello there because on this episode of Sprite Analysis, we're going to take a look at Star Wars Episode 3 Revenge of the Sith for the Gameboy Advance, released in 2005. This is actually one of my favorite Gameboy Advance games, but also stylistically it's always been a strong point of reference for me in pixel art. So today I want to study some of the fun design choices behind the pixel art for this game. So let's do it! Alright, this is where the fun begins. So for starters, the Game Boy Advance resolution is 240 by 160 pixels, so keep that in mind as the available canvas size for everything that we're going to be looking at. It's actually quite a versatile pixel density that has sort of a nice low resolution look, while still offering a lot of space to work with if you're willing to get creative. This game is a side-scrolling beat-em-up style, and the player is able to move within a certain lane on the screen, which, from what I'm able to discern, is about 64 pixels in height. So that's 40% of the overall canvas height. It's situated to the lower portion of the screen, which leaves plenty of room above for the jump animation height and visibility of the backdrops to set the scene. The focus of attention here is aided by steps of color within the floor tiling, which go from the darkest tone near the edges of the screen towards the lightest tone near the middle of that player lane. These colors are also fused together with some simple dithering. In this case it's applied as a slim band of checkerboarding that sort of blends those adjacent tones together. So those gradients from the edges are kind of acting as a vignette that draws your eye towards the play area. But the thing I love the most about this lane style construction is that it affords a lot of opportunity for playing with the geometry of the floor perspective. The repeated floor tiles of this hangar level use a perfect 45-degree angle built from a corner-to-corner line of pixels, which is a simple construction to be sure, but an effective one. My favorite example of this perspective is used in the Jedi Library level, where the perspective lines create these long rows of shelves and provide a nice sense of depth. As a side note, I've also always liked the added touch of the glowy data books reflecting on the floor here. But the linear 45-degree tiling isn't the only construction used in this game. Another interesting example is in the boss stage for General Grievous, which, I've stitched together a couple images here just to piece together the full backdrop, but we can see that the lines on the floor tiling all lead to a single vanishing point, which gives the perspective of this battle a really cinematic feel, and it looks even cooler if you're actually able to position your characters right over that perspective. And here are two more examples of perspective just to show some more unique constructions. The circular room of the Jedi Temple in particular is a really dramatic presentation, and it kind of evokes the sort of framing that we're familiar with from the film. Not to mention the fact that curves in pixel art require very careful consideration to plan out. Let's move down in scale now and take a look at some of the character sprites. So for starters, let's look at the hypnotic way that these sprites sway back and forth in their idle animation. Notice how the majority of their body mass stays in a relatively confined area, and the individual clusters of pixels that make up their legs and torsos also seem to breathe and move more than if they were just shifted uniformly back and forth. What's going on here is that, in addition to full body parts of the sprite being shifted to make the idle animation, the individual pixel colors and clusters are also changing dynamically to convey even subtler motions. Probably the best example here is on Anakin's boot. See how that highlight along the front continually forms and disappears as his leg rocks back and forth? And that part of his boot is actually staying in the same spot, but in the context of the rest of the motion, and with a few extra pixels changing the overall silhouette, this helps provide a subtler animation than if his entire boot were just jerking back and forth. Also, you probably already noticed that the lightsaber brightness cycles through different appearances at a high frequency to give them this sort of flickering effect. And this is something that doesn't translate accurately in my video frame rate or to the static images we'll be looking at, obviously. But just know that in-game it's actually a really elegant way to handle their appearance. I think it's pretty cool. In combat, the pixel effects are handled more traditionally. We get these dynamic poses and solid smearing of the saber blade to give like a nice swooshy look to the attack animations that also indicates the direction it's being swung. As for the sprite construction, if we bring in some of the other characters from this game, we'll see that the sprite heights here range from 25 pixels tall for Yoda up to 65 pixels for General Grievous, with most of the human characters being around 48 to 54 pixels tall. If you recall, the screen height is 160 pixels, so these character sizes take up roughly a third of that height, which provides good visibility on screen. I'm a big fan of stylization in sprite design, so I happen to love the cartoony appearances of the characters here. To me, it's reminiscent of the Clone Wars animated series. I've chosen one of these to look at up close, Anakin, because he's one of the two main playable characters and does a good job highlighting this stylization. What stands out to me are the broad clusters of light and punchy colors defining his main form. There are also a variety of shade tones at play as well, but the strength and unbroken clustering of these tones in particular contributes to that cartoony appearance for me. The other factor is that there's line work used around and within most of the sprite, but it's not super obvious like with sprites that use an entirely black outline. These sprites use colored outlines that adopt the color scheme of the piece that they surround. So with Anakin, for instance, his stylized orangey hair is outlined in brown. And there are even 2 different steps of brown here to provide even more dimension to the outline. Colored outlines are a great way to inject some more vibrancy and depth into a sprite design, and as long as the tones are dark enough, they still provide a strong grounding and presence to the sprite that makes you say, "You are a bold one." This stylization really carries through to the dialogue portraits, which, rather than being photo accurate to the actors or CGI, kind of lean towards that cartoony appearance that brings cohesion to the stylistic tone of the game in general. The portraits are created within a space of 48 by 56 pixels, and similar to the sprite work, use a few steps in tone to achieve the rendering. This is probably easiest to see on Mace Windu, where the steps towards darker colors create the rounding along the head, as well as clearly defining the front and the side of the head. I've always loved the connection between a character sprite and the dialogue portrait. It's just a great opportunity to reinforce the character design and the art style, and it's also just kind of fun to interact with characters in a game and then see their face and it's like, hey, that's the little guy that's on the screen. Probably my favorite example of this type of immersion is in the Order 66 segment, where Commander Cody receives the hologram from Sidious, and you've got this little 9 pixel tall hologram in his hand, and then for the dialogue portrait you get Darth Sidious's face, and it's kind of complete with a blue hologram color treatment. Another immersive element like this is the upgrade screen, with this awesome full character hologram sprite and a stylish HUD for selecting and reviewing upgrades. What's great here is that we've got a lot of information presented within that small canvas of 240 by 160 pixels, so there's some really creative use for making that space work. The little character in the ability icons is only 12 pixels tall, and then the letters next to it there are only 3 by 5 pixels. On top of that, there's just a really stylish presentation to the whole thing. Like we got the blinking lights, and there's these various shades of gray being used to create different levels of reflection and embossing on the metal bordering. Okay, before we wrap this up, I know there's one more question on everyone's mind with regard to pixel sizing, and I'm not sure if you've heard this from another pixel artist before. It's not a story they'd tell you, but that question is, how high is the high ground? So I've done the measurements, crunched the numbers, I ran the simulations, and if we compare the relative character positions using each of their equivalently placed boots, that difference is 24 pixels, which, if this game is built using 8x8 tiles, is equivalent to 3 of those, or to use another frame of reference, that height is just 1 pixel shorter than a Yoda sprite. Alright, thanks for joining me for this one, and I hope some of the information here helps double your pixel art power for the next time we meet. So thank you for watching, and take care and keep it square, and may the Force be with you.